Welcome to West Virginia Beer Roads, a podcast all about beer from a West Virginia perspective. I'm Erin McCoy, here with my podcast partner, Charles Bockway.
Today, we're going to be talking to a guy who's been a guest before with us. It's a man who has a most interesting work background in brewing in several of the top West Virginia craft brewers through the years. He knows our local industry very well. Wouldn't you agree, Erin?
Right. I can't think of anyone, at least in the northern part of the state, who's more qualified to talk about what's going on in our local craft brewing industry than he is. So let me introduce today's guest. It's Austin Weser from Morgantown, West Virginia. Austin, welcome back to West Virginia Beer Roads.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Austin, for people who may not know you, let's start out by refreshing us on your background in brewing. Where'd you get your start in craft brewing?
I'd say like the beginnings of it were when I was in the Army in Germany. I went around to all the little breweries and always thought, hey, the U.S. could have good craft beer. I met a friend of mine here in town in Morgantown. We started brewing together a bit on the weekends for home brewing. I kind of finagled my way into commercial brewing at Chestnut. I was there for a couple of years. I ended up at Stumptown after that, and for almost two and a half years, and then for about 4 years, I was at High Ground Brewing.
So I love that you got started. Your interest came from Germany, being in the United States Army, and got to thank the Army for that, because I've heard that from other brewers, not necessarily in West Virginia, but I know I've heard it from other brewers who say they got their interest in different beer because they were stationed in Europe, and especially in Germany, where everybody's drinking beer.
Well, before we get any further into this podcast, I want to introduce the beers we're drinking, since I see that you're drinking a beer, Austin, and I know Charles and I have one. So what you sipping on?
I have La Bella Vita from Weathered Ground. It's their Italian Pilsner. It's pretty great beer. Nice, crisp, clean. Has a bit of a raw grain character, but its finish is very nice. I like it a lot.
That's not one I've had before, Charles. Have you sampled that one?
I have not had that one. No, I don't think I have. Anyway, I don't remember it. I think maybe it's a fairly new one, but we'll have to ask those guys down there. I can't remember, but yeah. So we're drinking another standard beer here. That's the Big Timber IPA, which of course is around in all the Go Marts and everywhere else, and Kroger's, which is easy for beer to find, sells very well in West Virginia. And I know these guys have, tweaked it through the years a little bit here and there. And I really like the direction that beer's taken, and it's a nice product. So cheers, everybody.
Yeah, cheers.
Let's have a
cheers
sip.
to our local drinking here. All right, well, Austin, the last time we talked with you, you were brewing for High Ground, as you mentioned a few minutes ago, but over in Preston County. Obviously, you've left that job, so I'm curious, what are you into now?
I work at a restaurant here in Morgantown at 48 Donley. I'm currently going to school for HVAC, refrigeration, and boiler technology. I do plan to get back into brewing at some point, probably on a smaller scale, but there are also a couple of commercial offers out there in the ether. I can't really say anything more about them, but they're out there.
Yeah, and with that HVAC training, you'll be even more valuable for the cooling systems and all at the breweries.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, talk about well-rounded.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, with your experience and working in the restaurant industry, it puts you in a good position to stay current with the local beer market, or continue to stay current with the local beer market, wouldn't you say?
I do. I'm lucky to be located, in Morgantown. There's places like Apothecary and Black Bear and Mountain Mamas, places that have a really nice selection of West Virginia craft beer and other craft beer available throughout West Virginia.
And one has to do their research, of course. It's your job
Absolutely.
to stay abreast on these subjects.
Yeah, that's true. So I like thinking about the beer now, and that you've got a lot of good local spots. You mentioned Apothecary, Blackbeard, all those are wonderful taps usually. They collect some of and really curate some of the best taps around. But with all those taps, I'm kind of curious, what are your favorite styles to brew? If you were
Well,
brewing for any of those places, what would you be wanting them to carry that you like to brew?
okay. So if I had three, I'd probably pick three. One, I'd pick something easy, like nice, clean. I like the pseudo loggers are really nice because they're crisp, they're clean, they're fast. You can turn them around really quickly, and you can do a lot of interesting stuff with them. I'd certainly make a hazy IPA because, well, they sell. They do sell. But I really enjoy. If I had one niche beer that I like making, it was a Sati. Um, it's an awesome style of beer that almost nobody makes. We made one at High Ground. It's called Ymir the Creator. It's a great beer for like colder months, fall, winter. It's got a lot of grain, a lot of toasted grain, juniper, and a lot of those really great cold weather flavors.
Yeah, I remember some of the juniper flavors and things that are less common that are in those satis. There was a beer over at Ohio in Athens, Ohio, at their competition they had over there one time, and Little Fish Brewery there in town was going to brew the winning beer, and the winning beer was a sake, or at least that's the one they picked out of the winning beers. Yeah, and that's where I had that. I thought it was a very interesting and well made, wonderful, certainly for a home brew, and the Little Fish folks did a great job recreating that sake. May have even improved it, over the over the original.
Could be.
Yeah.
Well, those are some interesting styles that and some popular and good styles, obviously. Are those the same styles that you like to drink as well as brew?
Yeah, I mean, these days, most of the time, because with such a busy schedule with work and school, a lot of the heavier stuff, a lot of the big double, triple IPAs, heavy stouts, and stuff like that. I don't get a chance to have too many of. If I want to have a couple, I have to have something lighter. And
Sure.
on occasion, we'll get like a hazy IPA or something in there, something new, something. But if I see something interesting on the board, it's generally the first thing I try. So I always go for the weirdest thing I can see. So.
Yeah, sure.
I would like to dive a little deeper into those some of those beer styles and get your opinion on things because I know you've probably brewed many examples of all these. But start out with Austin, hazy beer versus clear beer. There seems to be quite a divider of opinion on that these days.
There is. Um, I tend to find people that are, there's the old school people that, haze doesn't belong in beer. But, to those people, I just say, hey, Germans are making hazy beer now. So it can't be all bad. And
Yeah, yeah, and the Germans have always made the Hefeweizens and
oh yeah,
hazy. Yeah, even yeah.
but I've I've always thought about hazy beer, like hazy IPAs, for example. I love hop flavor, but I'm not a huge fan of bitterness. And I think if you can get all the flavor there and show people that hops don't just have to be about bitterness, they can really be about flavor and to showcase that flavor is really, I think that's generally what most of the hazy, at least IPAs, tend to try to do is accentuate flavor versus just pure bitterness. But, there is something to be said for a nice, crispy, slightly bitter, dry hop lager or something. It could be a beautiful thing too, but everything in balance, not so
Yeah.
much, going one way or the other.
Yeah, and we even in the European beers in Germany, you get some of the brewers that do make a pretty bitter beer, certainly in their uh, Pilsner styles and things like that. But so let's to take the bitter beer, then let's contrast it with malty beer. Uh, what's your kind of read on malty versus bitter there?
I mean, malty and bitter, um, they can they can both be good. But things being too malty and too sweet tend to not be like beer at all. They tend to be more, I don't know, like a winter beverage of some sort. Like,
Dessert.
yeah, almost like dessert because grain is very sweet, especially like just generally wort, even when you're boiling it. But bitter, bitter versus malty. If I had to pick, I generally like more malty stuff. But to be fair, bitterness is essential in every good beer, I think.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, you need bitterness to balance out some of the malt, and even if it's a little bit of bitterness, so that you don't really notice it so much, but it's in there. And if it's not there, then like it's just cloying sweet, it's and maybe some people like that because that's what they're looking for. I'm not saying that's awful. It's not. But yeah, there's always that interesting balance between malt and bitterness.
I've noticed it's funny because I'll have a beer I don't think is bitter at all, and there'll be somebody new, and I'll say, "Hey, try this, hazy IPA. It's not very bitter at all." They'll take one sip of it and be like, "Oh no, it's." But I figure it's because I've gotten so used to hops and bitterness over the years that it's just generally their palate isn't quite used to it yet.
Yeah, I think that's so true because I remember even back in the early days of my drinking these new beers that were coming out and being made, that I'd have a couple of these beers that had some bitterness in them or extra bitterness, from California or Philadelphia, wherever, from good brewers. And I would think, gosh, this is so potent. Nowadays, I can drink that beer and think, well, it's hoppy, but it's not that bad.
Yeah,
But originally I couldn't hardly drink it,
yeah.
because it was,
I
yeah.
have a good example of that chill wave from Great Lakes. I used to think that was the bee's knees. Like, oh my gosh, they couldn't make something better than this. And I actually, I still like it. It's a very good beer, but it's like when you try it now, it almost, I don't know, it's not malty, but it's not the hoppy blast it used to be.
Yeah. Our tastes have definitely, not, I'm sorry, I don't mean us specifically. I feel like craft beer drinkers in general tastes change and obviously broaden and throughout our, when we start versus where we are,
Absolutely.
Hmm.
growth. This is what we call growth. But let's move over now. Let's talk about the state of brewing overall in West Virginia. What do you think in terms of the number of breweries in the state? Are there enough? Are there too many? How do you feel about that?
Well, I think we've hit a point with the growth of West Virginia breweries and the amount of them. There is room. There's niches that can be kind of put into the market still, but there's so many available beers now that it puts a real it kind of is putting a I think it's putting a strain on West Virginia breweries having more outside choices, I suppose. But that's not to say that we can't certainly be competitive with anybody. I think some of the best beer I've ever had ever is made here, and the market is ever changing, and I hope there's still room for expansion.
When you previously answered this question, when you said what's available, were you referring to distribution, how it's grown somewhat, and that there's more availability to people within West Virginia to where they aren't necessarily going directly to their West Virginia brewers?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
it's with things like certain like Aslan with New Trail, they've certainly um, the availability of those along with their price point makes it when people are in the store, even a craft beer store, they'll look at a New Trail double IPA and they'll maybe look at a weather ground or a high ground double IPA, and maybe the West Virginia craft beer is $4 more, and that's all they need to know sometimes. And it can be a shame. It can be a hindrance, but at the same time, it's like I feel like the quality of the product here in West Virginia is high enough to where there's still a lot of people that understand that we make a better product than a lot, and people certainly are still coming to the breweries. So.
Yeah, and around the country, of course, the craft market has kind of peaked. I mean, it was a sweet time a few years ago. Everybody was getting into the brewery business. Probably a number of those people weren't the best business people. They weren't the best brewers. Now they're exiting the industry. And we're getting I think the first time in 2014, the first time we'd had more craft breweries closed than we had open. 2014, did I say that? 2024.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's hard enough to get used to saying 2025.
Anyway, so I know that it's good though to clean out sort of the people that aren't competitive. You don't need them in there. I mean, you hate that people are going to go out of business, but when it gets to West Virginia brewers, I don't know, maybe we got a few too who need to up their game or maybe just work on it a little bit more to make sure that they succeed.
Certainly. Some of the breweries though are in and actually a really good spot because of availability of where they're at. I'm not saying that there's not craft beer available in and around Beckley, but I mean, for certain, Weather Ground is the best thing available around, and it's pretty amazing because everybody in Beckley can go there, or in Terra Alta, places that don't import a lot of the breweries from out of state, like
Sure.
shops and stuff around there don't really do that. So that can be kind of an advantage for some of these West Virginia breweries in more remote areas. Their tap rooms can stay full.
Right.
Well, the past couple of years, we're obviously hearing more and more about a dry January, and here we are, it's January. Do you have any specific thoughts on just really the overall impact of dry January and/or how that may or may not affect craft beer sales?
I mean, there are, you hear a lot about things online sometimes, and they tend to be, perhaps you hear about them more because social media gets to everybody quicker. Dry January, there might be more people exercising restraint for numerous reasons, New Year's resolutions generally. That might be one of the big things in it, but I feel like a lot of younger people, especially, maybe trending away from alcohol, but I couldn't tell you exactly, especially living in Morgantown at WVU.
Right. That's kind of
I don't
unfair,
really
right?
see that trend as much here. It's still, they may not be as crazy as it used to be, but it still hasn't slowed down that much.
It hasn't, but as you just said, the younger generation, it appears maybe there's a lot of NAs or non-alcoholic drinks that are trending and coming into our market, and abstinence pledges, just in general, young adults are drinking less. So aside from dry January, there's all of these things. They've got to impact our West Virginia market, I would think, at least from a observing perspective.
They do. I had an idea. I wanted to make a few things that, the last places I worked, things like, hop water is pretty fun in a can. I like it. I don't know if it's for everyone, but I've tried basically maybe seven or eight different ones, and there are certainly really good ones, and there's certainly really not so good ones. I think they could be a thing though, that even without alcohol, you could still get that enjoyable hop flavor, and carbonation. I mean, I'm a big fan of club soda myself and the flavored carbonated water. So, maybe doing something like that, maybe that be one of the new microbreweries. They just do non-alcoholic beverages.
Or maybe that's a way somebody kind of helps offset sales from abstinence or, younger people not drinking as much. It could go either way.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Berkeley Springs Brewing Company. Their hop water, I forget exactly what they call it, spa water, I think they call her. But they do I thought, a really nice hop water, and I think there's a number of other places that carry that carry that now. They're starting to get some distribution on that.
Every day is a party here in Morgantown. I tell you what. Mark does a great job about getting, I'm pretty sure, every West Virginia beer that exists.
Well, speaking of non-alcoholic beers, though, I've been recently just seeing some news articles in the brewing news about new brewing yeasts out in the West Coast. The company's coming out with beers that have no or almost no alcohol. That just are the yeasts don't produce the alcohol. I don't know if that could be a real growing thing if they work and taste good. I mean, I haven't tried any of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Even, as several years ago, there's enzymes and things you can add to the fermentation tank that'll lower the amount of gluten. They'll lower the amount of alcohol. They'll uh, all the technological advancements they've made in yeast in the last 6 or 7 years have been pretty astonishing. Omega, kind of with all their stylized yeast stuff that they've been doing, and then on top of that, like Fermentus, Sofale, kind of followed up. They're kind of and also Imperial. Like Imperial does an amazing job. We used a lot of Imperial yeasts at High Ground, and they too, I think, now have a low alcohol production yeasts, and it's it could be the next big thing, especially if it'll cut down on calories too. That also helps.
Well, Austin, Aaron and I here are going to take a small refreshment break. Just another West Virginia beer that we've got here so we can keep this conversation going. And this one is, will you go ahead and tell them?
We have Way of the Monk.
Oh, did a double?
It's 11%. It's a Belgian dark strong ale. It's not a double one.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know it's a very tasty beer. I've had this several times from Weather Ground, and so Aaron, I think you have another question for us, and now we'll get back to some real information here.
I do. I want to know, what are your personal favorite beers that you've ever brewed? Maybe one or two that you could discuss.
Let's see. Peace Among Worlds that we made.
Peace Among Worlds. Okay.
We made about, I think, 2 years ago. But it's
that was a high ground beer, right? High Ground Brewery.
That was one of them. But it's a horchata porter. So we actually use torrefied rice in it. It does have all the characteristics of a porter. It tends to be a bit smoother. It has a small amount of lactose in it. It's got cinnamon and vanilla, and it reminds me of Cinnamon Toast Crunch cereal, but not incredibly sweet. It is a bit sweet, but not overly.
Sounds delicious.
There's another one, a fun beer we made at High Ground called Heavy Doge. I love that beer. It's every kind of Citra you can imagine. So it's T90, T45, Lupomax, Cryo. It has Citra Incognito, Citra.
Wow.
It has Hop Hash Citra. It had Citra in every form.
Wow.
And it was just amazing, like how Citra could be all on its own. Because like everybody uses it, but it tends to, go by the wayside these days. And I just kind of wanted to make something that people really reintroduced it. But I also really enjoy that Ymir the Creator. I've been working on that since I was a home brewer. I've just been fascinated with the style, the sauté, and getting many of those like really cool flavors of dark beer season into a beer. And yeah, I'd say those are probably my top three that I've ever made.
Well, they all sound fantastic.
And I love that they are so culinary in style and ingredients, and it doesn't really surprise me that now you're working as a chef in a restaurant, and so that it all kind of fits together, doesn't it?
I actually came from a restaurant to brewing. I was working in restaurants before I started a craft brewery too.
Ah, yeah, we didn't touch on that earlier. Yeah, go ahead and throw that one in. Where was that?
I was here in town. There's a restaurant called Sargasso. I was lucky enough to work for a couple of really good chefs. Simon Poulin, who's from Canada, and a chef that's here now at 48 Dongley, Thomas Metzler. He's from Austria. He's fantastic. And Kurt Blosser, chef here now. They've just taught me a whole lot about food and flavors and interactions, and I just kind of tried to take that and kind of put it into beer.
Well, that's right up your alley, isn't it?
It is.
Well, yeah, you're making me hungry and thirsty with all these great culinary beer descriptions and restaurant talk. But you mentioned the favorite beers that you brewed that you love to drink yourself, that you enjoyed. But I'm curious what the drinking public might have thought. And could maybe do you know a couple of the beers that were really the highest rated beers, like on Untapped, that you actually took the lead in brewing?
Yeah. So everything at Stumptown was highly rated, but those were all John's and Jeff's beers. Mine, I'd say our Imperial IPAs, our heavy series, generally rated really well. I think they're all above 4, like 4.1, maybe even.
Yeah, certainly anything above 4 in a West Virginia brewery is strong because there aren't that many.
Yeah. But those tended to do really well. I think our Schwartz beer actually, Ludicrous Speed, is over 4, and that's a fun beer to make too. We made a pseudo Schwartz beer and got a little Spaceballs influence. Who's the Schwartz?
Yeah.
So we called it Ludicrous Speed. And actually on the can it says they've gone plaid on it, but it's yeah, I think that one's over 4. I actually think the Horchata Porter, Peace Among Worlds, might be close to 4 or a little bit higher too.
Yeah, that's definitely a really good beer. I've had that one before. Love that.
Well, I always continue to enjoy the different twists and turns, obviously, that our brewers take when they're being creative. Austin, how have you seen the tastes and preferences of West Virginia beer customers developing or changing since you got started drinking and brewing?
Oh,
Broad, I know that's broad.
yeah, it is. But at the same time, I've seen a lot more IPA drinkers, and I attribute that to the hazy IPA. A lot of that is, people call it. It's funny. I once had somebody that really doesn't like hazy IPAs refer to it as introductory IPA, and they were trying to be derogatory, but the way I was seeing it was, okay, it's a style of beer bringing more people to craft beer, so can't be all that bad. So with that, anytime I go to Sheets or somewhere like that, and I look in their beer cooler, there's a lot of IPAs, even from New Belgium and Big Timber and all those places. They're and Chestnut here in town. That have you'll see those missing on shelves versus all the even lighter brands and stuff like that, and that's kind of nice. I've seen a lot more people at least go out of their way to try some, more bitter, well, maybe not more bitter, but more hoppy IPAs.
Yeah, it's definitely nice to see local consumers branching out a little bit, and we seem to be kind of definitely sticking in that hazy phase. I do feel like with mine and Charles' recent interactions around the state with brewers and/or business partners or people involved with breweries, that it seems like maybe a flagship style might be reemerging. How do you feel about that?
think that's true. I certainly think people have, I guess, for lack of a better word, like camps now. Crowd in Terra Alta, um, it was wild. They, generally, the light beer drinkers, they come in, they try just about anything we had. But you are right. I think there's a lot to be said for like that one beer that people, get used to, and that's what I like, and that's what I'm sticking with, and you know, and I like to see that more of that has happened at West Virginia breweries. I think it's a good thing, partially. I think that's a good thing for getting people in the door. I think also when after people are willing to trust a certain brewery with a certain beer, maybe they should say, hey, maybe they can make some other stuff that I would enjoy and maybe branch out a little.
Well, Austin, you've worked at, as we've talked about earlier today, several West Virginia breweries. You certainly are a customer at some of the best beer bars in the Morgantown region for sure. And I've even caught you drinking at Weathered Ground, I remember a year or two back. And other times, I know that you get out and sample and try a lot of different West Virginia beers. So if you could sum it up kind of in a nutshell, what do you think, or what would you say West Virginia brewers do really well? And second, what are some areas they may need to focus on for improvement?
West Virginia Brewers, as a overall, um, I think like the WVU football team, they're generally underrated in other places. I think they do a pretty fantastic job of punching above their weight a lot. They make a lot of great beer. Like there's a lot of breweries in the state making a lot of really great things. I think what we could improve on in West Virginia craft beer is perhaps getting our name out to other places. So when I go to other places outside of the state of West Virginia, I tell them, about breweries in West Virginia, and they're like, "Oh, I've never heard of that. Oh, I've never had beer from West Virginia. Oh, I've never tried this. Oh, this is really good. Where's this from?" And it's, I think that perhaps that might be the next thing to maybe work on is try to get our name maybe a little larger outside of the state. Uh, I thought about maybe a collaboration between, maybe several breweries in West Virginia. I had an idea of maybe getting a small collaboration of craft brewers together and, maybe two representatives and sending a truck with, West Virginia beer to the GABF and just have us represented by two, pretty solid, people chosen by the craft beer community. And, we could have our beer at GABF and have people try it out west and let them know what, what we're doing and what we're all about.
Yeah, I have to say I love your ideas there. I mean, you've come up with a couple of good ones. I remember going to GABF, a long time ago back, 15 years ago or more. And like the state of Florida had a group, person there that just brought beers from a lot of different breweries in Florida. And I spend a lot of time in Florida these days. I'm a retired guy, I go to Florida for anyway, I get to a lot of breweries in the Tampa Bay market. And I'm with you. West Virginia brewers are just as good as most of those little breweries. It's not that they don't have maybe a couple that are really outstanding, but we got a couple that are really outstanding. It's just fun to know that our little state is producing, and I'm with you, producing good beer. Do you think, though, maybe that the fact that we're getting all these new beers in the state, you mentioned a couple like New Trail and some other breweries that have entered the state, Aslan, very good, really well-respected breweries in their own areas. Do you think that's helping maybe people compare West Virginia beer to other breweries that are really highly rated? Does it affect kind of the impression that our local people have to think, well, gee, our beer is just as good as those beers?
I think it does. It's always good to have, people to compete against, I suppose, as far, maybe not compete against, but to have different sort of availability that you can try. I do think we're just as good, if not, better than some of these like well-known brands. But at the time. Those breweries are very good at getting their name out and advertising very well. So they tend to get, squeaky wheel gets the grease, I suppose. It's like
Always does.
they're very good at advertising. They're very good at promoting their products, and maybe we could get a little better at that.
What would you say is the next big thing in local beer, craft beer?
Local craft beer, people like Short Story and Weather Ground and High Ground, and they have a lot of potential to make a lot of these real interesting styles. But I feel like you said earlier, perhaps focusing on flagships, maybe not necessarily one, but maybe three or four, to draw more people into the breweries, and then maybe some smaller styles to come back, some more niche styles. But kind of get you in with the big names or the most produced, and then getting people into tap rooms, I think, is the next.
I think it's wonderful that our distributors are finally getting a lot of the better breweries from around our region and getting them in here, not only so that we can compare against those breweries, the quality that we're producing at our small breweries in West Virginia, but also just the idea that, we can taste some of the more popular stuff that people, has a buzz in the craft beer world, and you want to try it. I mean, New Trail is just like killed it in Pennsylvania. I mean, what an incredible job they've done there. And for us to be like the second state to get their beer, that's really cool. And their beer is good and priced right, as you mentioned earlier in this podcast. I love the pricing, and that is something, you want to focus on. I hate to talk about, pricing a lot, because I know our brewers are so small that the economies of scale don't work in their favor, and it means they're paying the highest prices for everything. And a New Trail that's making a lot more beer can get better deals on hops and better deals on malt, and all that. So you understand why there's pricing differentials maybe. Let's talk about brewing ingredients. And when you were brewing, which I know you're not today, but you're brewing a number of years, there's so many options today out there in brewing ingredients. What are some of your favorite malts, favorite hops, and yeasts to use? I think you mentioned a few that you've brewed with earlier, but just kind of sum that up, and like maybe including some of your favorite adjuncts and flavorings.
So there's quite a few of those. We went almost exclusively to Proximity Malt. They're out of Delaware. Colorado, but we got most of our malt from Delaware, which is less than 6 hours away. And they're a great maltster. I love their products. They have quite a few different selections, but for as far as specialty grain goes, they make a crystal rye malt that I can't really get enough of. It's super good. Gambrinus malt out of Canada. They do a honey oat malt that's really delicious. As far as like hop stuff, I got on the liquid hop concentrate stuff pretty early. I love Incognito. I love Spectrum. I love the new hops, the new hops that they're breeding at Yakima Valley. Also, there's a brand new set of products. I've actually looking forward to trying it. I just ordered some, and I'll be home brewing here in a couple weeks with terpenes. But they're not just, I know terpenes are synonymous with cannabinoids, but these are terpenes from like lychee, lemon, pretty much anything with a flavor has terpenes. And I ordered a few lychee and lavender terpenes, and I'm looking forward to making a small IPA with those.
I know you seem to be open to the new products that are coming out, and I know sometimes there's more traditional brewers that don't want anything to do with those. I love some of the stuff I've tasted with all this new chemistry and that's coming out of these, whether it be hops and new malt varieties or certainly the yeasts as well. It's amazing.
Oh, absolutely. The stylized yeasts, they're amazing. They some of the stuff they do with thiol precursor and processing and the flavors they're creating from malt, actually. Like, people don't realize that some of these yeast developments, especially through Omega, you can actually get fruity flavors out of malt because they have thiol precursor in them, and they just weren't getting converted by yeasts. And I think the people doing that maybe the best in the state right now are Short Story. They're doing a pretty fantastic job with those.
Yeah, they're doing a good job across the board, and I think their business is showing it. They've opened new tap rooms, and yeah, good business. Good
Their new
business.
place in Morgantown is really nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, before we leave this topic of ingredients, mention a little bit about some of your favorite either adjuncts or flavoring ingredients that you enjoy brewing with.
Oh, juniper. I'm a big fan of juniper. I know it's a very divisive thing, and not a lot of people are really into it. I love oats. I love malted oat. I like that honey malted oat. But as far like any fruit peels, I found fruit peels were really nice as a for light beers because you can add quite a bit of flavor without having to put whole fruit and muddy up the process and do a whole bunch of stuff. So it tended to be really nice. But yeah, I'd say yeah, fruit peels, juniper, those are a lot of my favorites.
All right. So if we have any younger brewers out there getting started or getting into home brewers maybe or getting started in commercial brewing, you heard it from Austin Weser. There's some good stuff out there to check out, and you got to give it a try.
Well, Austin, obviously, we've talked about you're back to a commercial kitchen. Discuss the similarities you see between brewing and chefing.
Oh, flavors, I suppose. It's anytime you have ingredients, you definitely want the best, freshest ingredients, and you want to maximize them to their fullest potential without messing them up. Well, yeah, generally, the growers, the farmers, the maltsters, hop farmers, everybody that's doing the hard work out there have put a lot of work into making a really great ingredient, and it's really kind of a brewer or a chef's job, to take those ingredients and not really don't mess them up. Only do good. Try to move forward with them and let people know what they actually taste like.
That's a really great comparison. That was very well said. I can see that from both sides of that comparison. So yeah. Well, before we wrap up our podcast today, I'm curious what the future holds for Austin Weezer. Do you have any life goals or similar things that you want to talk about that maybe you haven't really gotten into the meat of? I know you talked a little bit before about what you're doing, but if you want to elaborate.
Okay. So yeah, I am going to school to be, for HVAC, refrigeration, as maybe a full-time gig, but I do want to start brewing again. I'm actually looking into maybe a small one barrel system, something that I can control and I can do the work on, and I could even do it not in my full time, but in spare time while creating things that I want to create, and I don't really have to worry too much about production issues and distribution issues and like all the big, I could sell to the craft beer breweries or places around town, just the bars around town. I think people trust me enough around to make a good product, and I'm sure that I actually had an idea for making individual. I mean, I guess it's not allowed, but to make beers for individualized places, you have to make it available for everyone.
Right.
So that's kind of you can't really do that, but at the same time, I thought it would be a pretty good idea. For each individualized place to have their own sort of draw. It's like, hey, we have this thing, we have this beer that you can try, and you have to go there to have it. So, but I certainly would make it available to everyone, but I wouldn't make that much. So,
Well, with a new administration just taking over the state, governor and all, new legislators coming in, you never know. Maybe the laws will allow you to do some of those things in the future. And I'm just glad that you're still interested in continuing to do some brewing down the road.
Absolutely.
Aaron, you want to wrap us up?
I do. We have had a fantastic time talking with you, Austin, and picking your brain about your craft brewing history and just history in general and where you are now and where you hope to be. And we really appreciate the time you spent with us today on West Virginia Beer Road. So Austin Weser of Morgantown, West Virginia, thank you for joining us on West Virginia Beer Roads. We wish you the best of luck.
Thank you for having me.
This brings us to the close of another podcast. Remember, you can subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast host. Thank you for listening to West Virginia Beer Roads.
West Virginia Beer Roads is a production of BrilliantStream.com.